Welcome to FlightGlobal Focus. My name is Amber Elias, and joining me for this News Focus episode is Craig Hoyle, FlightGlobal's European Defence Editor and Flight International Editor.
Hi Amber, thanks a lot for having me on this week.
Let's take a look at the top aviation stories this week on FlightGlobal. Investigators have determined that the first officer of a Pakistan International Airlines Airbus A320 selected the wrong ILS frequency before a wrong runway landing at Lahore. The twinjet had been operating flight PIA A320 from Dammam in Saudi Arabia to Multan on 17 January. But the Pakistani Investigation Authority, in findings released on 4 November, says adverse weather at Multan, with visibility down to 50 metres, prompted the crew to divert. Although the initial diversion airport was Karachi, where visibility was good, the crew instead opted for Lahore after considering such factors as passenger convenience and cabin crew duty time. However, low visibility procedures were in place at Lahore owing to fog. Czech investigators have disclosed that a Wizz Air UK Airbus A321 XLR's descent rate increased by 60% in the last few seconds, but for a hard touchdown and tail strike at Prague. It had been conducting an ILS approach to runway 24 following a service from London Gatwick on 11 September. Weather conditions at the time were normal, says Czech Investigation Authority UZPLN, with good visibility, although the 10-knot wind was variable from 150 to 220 degrees. Rolls-Royce has revealed a new build standard for the Trent 1000 engine, the XC, which incorporates improved parts that will double time on wing alongside inclusion of the manufacturer's Total Care Support Package. An option on the Boeing 787, where it is offered against the GE Aerospace GE-NX, the Trent 1000 has suffered from poor availability issues for a number of years, linked to premature degradation of certain parts, particularly high-pressure turbine blades. Leonardo has given the clearest warning yet that the future of its Yeovil factory in southwest England is under threat, if it does not win an order from the UK through the ongoing new medium helicopter competition. Following a submission deadline last year, Leonardo is the sole remaining bidder for the NMH with its AW149 Super Medium Twin. If successful, the airframer has promised to build the helicopter at Yeovil. Although the company submitted a best and final offer in April, the deadline for a decision from the UK Ministry of Defence has been repeatedly pushed back. EasyJet intends to have largely retired its fleet of elderly Airbus A319s by 2030, as the budget carrier's refleeting program accelerates. At present, the airline retains 82 A319s, 18 owned and 64 on lease, around 23% of its total 356-strong fleet. But EasyJet Chief Executive Kenton Jarvis says the small aircraft will be progressively retired over the coming years, with the new A320neo and A321neo jets taken from its outstanding 290-unit firm order book. Its 100th neo family jet will arrive next year, he points out. Speaking to FlightGlobal's Dominic Perry on 10 November to mark the carrier's 30th anniversary, Jarvis said the A319 fleet would be really all gone by 2030. Craig, let's chat about the 2026 World Air Forces Directory, which came out this week on FlightGlobal. As always, it's a very comprehensive report detailing the military aircraft of 161 nations, all the way from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe, and it's totaling just over a combined 52,200 in-service assets. All that data paints quite a picture, but how did it come together and what did you see as the standout part?
Yeah, so this is my biggest individual project every year, and I'd say I equally dread and look forward to doing it. It's pretty much a 1-month task from doing my original data pool to the actual report getting out online. It's a big job and there's a lot of data in there. So I would say right at the start, we need to thank our sponsor Embraer and also Cirium, which is our data partner for the project. We couldn't do it without them, so their support's invaluable. So there's a lot of hours that I spend on editing everything to get it into the category that we use. My first raw data pool is about 50,000 aircraft, and they are usually down to the individual tail number detail with Cirium. So I need to sort of strip a lot of that information out so I can just do summary level on each of the air forces. There's some bits I will just leave out entirely. So there's some categories like VIP transport, paramilitary airlines, border guards, and then we get into really little niche roles like hurricane hunting, target towing, firefighting. I don't include those because they're not sort of frontline military tasks. And then there's some other sort of oddities like aerobatic display teams or experimental aircraft that we won't put in there. So the big report is all done in Excel. So you end up with a massive spreadsheet. And I have to each year come up with the dark arts of how I manage to get through and do things like creating the top 10 lists for the types and nations. So I write myself notes each year so I can remember what on earth I did, and somehow it comes together. So there's a few standout items this time. Most notably, we lost a country entirely from our listings. So Syria's fleet was destroyed when the Assad regime collapsed at the end of 2024. So that removed about 400 aircraft, and they were either destroyed by opposition forces or, as the regime change happened, the USA and Israel did some airstrikes to stop the equipment falling into the wrong hands. It was quite a big change for the Middle East region. So that ended up about 4,200 aircraft, down 9% year on year. And that's really significant. The last time we saw a change like that was when the Taliban took control of Afghanistan again in 2021. On the actual sort of fleets themselves, one I'd highlight is we've really significantly upped our listing for the Chinese Air Force's Chengdu J-20 fighter. Data is very hard to come on that, but there's a lot of sources now that suggest it's probably got about 250, maybe even 300 examples in use. This is one of the challenging areas with doing a directory like this, because understandably, knowing exactly what the air forces of China, Russia, North Korea, even Ukraine, which is at war, it's very hard to actually get a really firm detail on exactly what they have. So there's a few bits where you might see the numbers don't change, particularly year on year. It's just hard to get that data. And the last thing I'd sort of flag on it all is this is a snapshot review. So we only do this once a year, and it's maddening. Every time you send one to press, within a couple of days, something big happens that doesn't make it in. Polish Navy just retired its Sea Sprite helicopters, so they'll stay in the listing, although they've now gone out of use. It's a big project, but it's one that I think sets us apart, and we'll carry on doing it.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the flagship reports that FlightGlobal produces, and does give a snapshot of the industry from an annual perspective. Obviously, it doesn't always include the minutiae of changes that happen post-production, but it does give a very interesting insight year on year, especially. And the directory breaks down the fleet sizes for different countries by role across 6 categories: combat aircraft, special mission, tanker, transport, combat helicopter, and training aircraft/helicopters. And we can see that the USA is top of all 6 lists. But were you surprised that China wasn't top of any list?
No, not at all. I mean, I've been doing this directory for more years than I care to remember, probably 15 plus years. And what we see is it changes a bit year on year, but not massively, obviously. But the USA's lead is so big, there's just no danger of it being overtaken. So in the sort of summary level, the US military's got just over 13,000 military aircraft. That's a quarter of the entire global fleet. And it's also more than the combined inventories of the next ranked countries: Russia, China, India, South Korea, and Japan. China's actually closest in combat aircraft. So US has about 2,700. China's got about 1,800. But when you look across the other categories, say special mission, the USA has about 1/3 of the global figure, and roughly 500 more aircraft in that category than China. But the one that really jumps off the page every year is in-flight refueling. So there are just over 800 tankers in use around the globe, and the US military has 75% of them, just over 600 aircraft. And Beijing's total is still in single figures. As I said, getting to know exactly what their fleet is difficult. So in reality, it might have a few more than the 9 we show, but the shortfall in that area is really operationally significant.
And we know that lots of aircraft are facing retirement in the coming years, and air forces globally are investing heavily in new technology like uncrewed aircraft. How do you expect to see the top aircraft types shift as new generations come into service?
Yeah, this is a really fascinating area for military air power at the moment. So you've got the coming era of Depends how you call them. So variously referred to as collaborative combat aircraft, or CCAs, then autonomous collaborative platforms, unmanned combat air vehicles, or loyal wingmen used to be the phrase that was used. I think along with the use of AI, this is still very much in its infancy, and it's hard to tell what impact it's going to have on future fleets. So the sort of early increment CCAs that are in development now are going to provide an add-on capability for piloted aircraft. So you're going to be using them to do some of the jobs that be referred to as dull, dirty, and dangerous. So things that you maybe don't want to risk a crewed aircraft with. So that's going in close to enemy air defense systems to suppress them and jam them, maybe doing some close-in strike missions. It's difficult there at the moment looking at concept of operations, how the air forces are going to do this, and very interestingly, how today's fighter pilots are actually going to train to do this. So although these are it's implied they're sort of sitting on the wingtip of your fighter, they may be many kilometers away doing their own job. So I think there's a lot of work behind the scenes that air forces have got to do while the technology is sort of coming along and people are flying demonstrators. For our review, we actually don't include unmanned aircraft at all in our review. So that would be something we'd have to consider if any fleet details emerge about things like CCAs. But I think that's a long way in the future. For the rest of the time I'm doing the directory, we're still going to have things like F-15, F-16, F-18 and F-35 dominating the top 10 lists for combat aircraft, certainly.
Yes, and although, CCAs do get a lot of attention at the moment, there does seem to be a lot of development, new test flights, a lot of talk in the industry and from the manufacturers about production and putting them in service. It does actually feel like they are further away than we actually think, and particularly further away in having a meaningful impact in Air Force fleets globally and replacing more traditional fighters.
So when you look at something like Ukraine and Russia being at war, we've certainly seen drones coming into that in a really big way and doing jobs that piloted fighters would never have done. I think, as I said, there's a lot of work that needs to be done around concepts of operations. There's considerations in things like ethics and proportionality when you're using AI. And the worry, I think, is that some nations will be very sort of conservative in how they adopt this sort of technology, while others, particularly likes of China, Russia, may just decide to use it to its full potential and get some sort of an advantage.
Absolutely. It is fascinating to have a look at these directories year on year because the changes are subtle, but, looking back a decade ago, they are meaningful. And I think we do see the changes in the fleet playing out in real life world events.
Yeah, I sometimes will go back and look 10 years back, what was a nation flying and what have they retired? And when you look parochially, looking at the UK, today we fly F-35s and Typhoons. A few years ago, we had Jaguars, Tornadoes, Harriers. So you do see the fleet changes a lot. We were seeing a lot in Europe that fleet sizes were getting smaller. With the Russia-Ukraine war, that is being reversed a bit. So we're seeing some nations now are buying more F-35s than they originally planned. And you've got nations like Poland who are really significantly upping their spend. And yeah, once we look at Poland's inventory in maybe 5 years' time, once it's brought F-35s in, it's going to look very, very different to how it did 15 years ago when they were still flying Soviet-era jets primarily.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode, Craig. And we will link directly to the directory in the show notes.
Thank you for having me. And I only get to do sort of data geek once a year, and that's probably enough for me. But it's a good project, and like I say, equally dread and look forward to it.
FlightGlobal Focus is your new essential podcast for trusted aviation insight. We publish new episodes twice weekly. Join us on Friday for a concise news briefing and on Monday for in-depth analysis covering airlines, defense, and aerospace. FlightGlobal Focus is a production of FlightGlobal, with audio editing by Lucy Johnson. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or for commercial opportunities, please email podcast@flightglobal.com, and more information can be found in the show notes. Listeners can get a discount to a new subscription to FlightGlobal with the code FGPodcast. Terms and conditions apply. And if you listen on Spotify, leave us a comment and let us know what you think of the show, and if there's any topics you want our journalists to look into. Listen, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.